CJ Barnett is back in scarlet and gray, and Paul Rhoads, a Power 5 former head coach, in the fold as well to help out the defensive cause. It's Ohio State Buckeyes Live, our 92nd edition. Hope that everybody out there understands and appreciates what we bring together here each and every week at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, in the form of Steve Hellwagon from Bucknets 247 Sports. Awaiting Kevin Noon, hopefully Buckeye Grove, and Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. What's going on?
Not too much. You're all cleaned up and looking good.
Yeah, I got my ears lowered here just a little bit earlier today, so I am. I've been a bit of a bum here in recent weeks, but it's COVID, so you don't really go anywhere and you don't really see anybody. So, it is what it is. But yeah, feeling a little better about myself today. So yeah, it's good.
All right, folks, here's the deal. We've got the very best in Ohio State football beat writers on the recruiting front, the personnel front. The experience and knowledge is first rate. Leave your comments, your questions in the live chat. I will get to them. And also keep in mind that your individual contributions keep us going here based on the channel and specifically this show. So we hope that you lock it on in here. All right, let's maybe save the personnel matters until possibly Kevin and Tony are able to join us. Let's start with the Big Ten schedule. So the Big Ten has really, in recent years, Steve, expanded its horizons, joined the rest of the conferences in regards to looking at other days of the week, adding Thursday and Friday games. It used to be, as you well know, even up until the last decade, where everybody in the Big Ten would play their 3 non-conference games, and then they would line up the other 8 or 9 conference games after that, and it was very regimented. Now we're seeing non-conference games played in the middle of the season. We're seeing the likes of Penn State and Wisconsin play in week 1. And, of course, for the Buckeyes, it's a Thursday night affair to open 2021.
Yeah, I think their TV partners, Fox and ESPN, really like the idea that there could be some conference games sprinkled throughout September as well as October, November, because those games draw better ratings and, more people across the Big Ten footprint are more apt to watch a conference game than to sit through a meaningless and a lot of times non-conference game. So I think there's been a concerted effort. Obviously, Ohio State and Minnesota will be among the tip-off games or kickoff games on the first Thursday of the regular season. Ohio State visiting Minnesota, just like they visited Indiana a few years ago, I think, on a Thursday night. And, once every few years, that's not such a bad thing. Doesn't appear like Ohio State will have a Friday game this year, as they did in 2019 when they had to play at Northwestern on a Friday night. There will be some Friday games that will get moved. It appears some of the other schools will. Probably up to 2 or 3 games will be moved to Friday night at some point in this calendar year before the season gets started, but don't have a real inkling of a lot of that just yet. But they did come out with a revamped schedule, and for Ohio State, it really didn't change a whole lot. It mainly moved some dates, and I don't have the old schedule in front of me right here, other than I think Ohio State was supposed to play Penn State right before playing at Michigan, as it had been a few years ago. And I think that got changed to where now the Ohio State and Penn State game will be the last part of October. And the Michigan game obviously will remain the last game of the season. So it really didn't have a lot of impact for Ohio State. I think for some of the other schools, it was necessitated because with the COVID schedule in 2020, they jumbled some homes and aways for some schools, and it could have led to some schools possibly playing 3 years in a row at the same location. So they had to jumble some things up a little bit, move some things around. And for Ohio State, though, the changes were kind of minimal, not anything of too much note. So very excited. I think that when people saw this schedule, I think people were excited to say, that's another good schedule for Ohio State. Here we go. So, kind of spread out the challenging games. And again, if the Buckeyes run the table, they'll be right there back in the playoff again in 2021.
Steve, I was looking forward to a one-on-one conversation with you for the next hour, but look who crashed the party here.
There's our guy, Tone.
Sorry about that.
How's it going, Tony?
Good. I can go. I can leave if you want.
No.
But as Steve was saying, like getting Penn State and Michigan away from each other on Ohio State's schedule, I think is huge for the Buckeyes and is a considerable win for them in that new schedule. I was a little bit bummed to see the Nebraska game pushed further into the fall, like into November, because as Steve knows, it's a great place to go and spend some time. And so I'm hoping the weather holds out when I am there, although I am also thrilled that the Minnesota game stayed in September because I don't want to be there in November.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, I figured that wasn't going to change, Tony, with that being earmarked as the first game of the season. And, again, you say, well, they want these schedules done in advance so that they can make all the logistical plans and everything. And yet they go in on 9 months' notice and changed it all up this past week. So, but that one I didn't figure was going to change just because they'd already gotten the approval from the schools, obviously, to do a special season opening game. And to me, I have no problem with that. As I was saying to him, I think the last time was Indiana in 2016 or 2017. So once every 3, 4, 5 years, if they're going to do that and put Ohio State on that pedestal where they are, highlighted in the first game of the college football season, I think that's a rightful place for Ohio State to be every now and then. So I don't have a problem with that. Minnesota is going to be a competitive team. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to look a lot different than when we last saw them. And this offseason is so important for so many of these schools to have a real offseason with a true spring football, a summer program for these teams, and a preseason camp. What wasn't talked about a whole lot was how preseason camp is usually done before the fall semester begins in late August. It's usually done earlier in the month of August, and instead it was done for all these schools while school was in session. And that makes it kind of hard to juggle 7 hours of football each day when you've got 3 or 4 hours of schoolwork you got to do. So they got through it the best they could, put the best product they could on the field. And as it turned out, it was what it was. But at any rate, the schedule is done for this year, and it looks pretty favorable if you're an Ohio State fan.
I even like that there's a week 0 game that they threw in there.
Now, who's playing that?
Nebraska, Illinois.
Illinois.
Are they going abroad to play a game? Is that the deal?
They're supposed to.
Oh, yeah, because of COVID.
Happen.
Yeah. Where are they supposed to go, I wonder?
Dublin, Ireland.
Okay.
How fitting.
Yeah. So if we're going to try to sell American football to the Irish, don't we send them the Fighting Illini? Isn't that's the key? That's
when I think of Illinois football, I think of Ireland.
I think of Dublin, Ireland.
When I think of Nebraska, I think of the Emerald Isle. And
I think of you could get 11 guys out of a Irish pub and they'd probably be just as good playing football as Illinois. No, I'm just kidding. They hired Brett Beelzebub, so that'll be his big debut there in Dublin, Ireland. And here's Nebraska. I mean, come on, man. The clock's ticking for Frosty the Snowman over there. That's week 0 is a must-win for both. Well, I wouldn't say it's a must-win for Brett Bielema, but his first game, it would be nice to establish his program right off the jump with a division win over Nebraska. But for Scott Frost, man, it's time, bro. You got to start winning some games.
Yeah, it's a must-win for me because I've been on his bandwagon for a while now. I think I even called him Urban Meyer 2.0 at one point.
Oh dear.
And he's not quite been that yet. So just yet, we'll give him some more time. But
not even Bowling Green Urban Meyer. I mean, it's just.
But like what he did at UCF was impressive, and I like just his football focus and how intent he was on things. But I don't know, maybe it's not possible at Nebraska anymore, But as I always say, anybody can win in the Big Ten West, and Nebraska is anybody. So, as Steve said, come on, it's time, and it's definitely time for Scott Frost to get some things going. And I know they keep losing people to the transfer portal. All of their eggs are seemingly in the Adrian Martinez basket at this point. Can he keep from turning the ball over? I don't think so.
Yeah, is there a tougher place to meet expectations, because those Nebraska fans still believe that they can contend nationally, and you're in the middle of nowhere. You can only grab so much of your roster out of Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota, and you've got to go a couple thousand miles away, but the expectations are to win big. And that's what's facing Scott Frost. Tony, I was right there with you. I thought, man, this is a home run hire. He is the perfect fit. He knows the culture. He's a hero there already. Quarterback with the national championship. They love him. Look at what he's done at UCF, from 0-12 to 13-0. But he's recruiting well. So the talent's on the roster somewhere. That's what the recruiting rankings tell us. So they should be doing much better than what they've been tripping around with 4 and 5 wins during his first few seasons. So Iowa was on the schedule, I believe, in 2020, the original schedule for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, in 2020 they were. Yeah.
And in 2020.
They had to cut
the Buckeyes
it down.
will miss Iowa. Just to further your point, Steve, in regards to it being a pretty soft landing for the Buckeyes here, because you got to figure most likely Wisconsin, Iowa, Northwestern are the 3 best teams in the West. Ohio State misses those 3. I think one game, what else jumps out to me that can't be dismissed is a date against Tulsa. Tulsa was one of the better group of 5 teams, and might be able to put up a fight in the horseshoe in week 3, coming off of Oregon, if that becomes a major test for the Buckeyes, and maybe a bit of a letdown there.
Yeah, you make a good point. That could be a sandwich game for Ohio State. I just called up the schedule myself. September 2nd at Minnesota, then 9 days to get ready for Oregon coming in. Obviously, Oregon had a pretty good team this past year. I think they won the Pac-12. Then I think they lost in their bowl game, didn't they, to Iowa State? Does that sound right?
34-17 they lost. Fiesta Bowl.
The Fiesta Bowl. Tulsa, as you said, was a very respectable team in the American this year. Didn't they lose to Cincinnati in the championship game? Is that right?
Yep.
And then Akron, I don't know much about them. I don't think their program's much to talk about. Obviously, at Rutgers with Schiano, Maryland at home with Loxley, and Tago Vailoa, younger version. Then you have 2 full weeks to prepare for the trip to Indiana. And I just wonder October 23rd if that'll be a night game. And then if October 30th, Penn State at home would be a night game. And then November 6th at Nebraska could also be a night game. They may give them 3 night games in a row. Back home with Purdue, not much going on there. Michigan State, I don't foresee a whole lot happening there. And November 27th at Michigan, this renewed, revitalized, rejuvenated Jim Harbaugh. Is this year 7 already of this disaster? And, I don't know. I don't see a whole heck of a lot going there. Really, the hay will be in the barn once they come back from Nebraska. I don't think either of those last 2 games at home will be much of a challenge, or the game at Michigan. I mean, it could be – Ohio State's just decimated them here in the last few years. And then you get ready for the Big Ten championship. Theoretically, a good team will come out of the West. And so that'll be that. But playing a young quarterback, I always say, it could be worth a loss that you just don't even see, because there could be 3 turnover game just pop up out of nowhere with a young quarterback. And so, again, I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying don't rule that out. So, even Haskins, as great a year as he had, although I don't blame that Purdue loss on Haskins per se, as much as they just were a terrible team defensively that year. But at any rate, it's going to be a fun year, I think, for Ohio State.
Yeah, go ahead, Tone.
I think by the time they get to that Indiana game, now you've got a redshirt freshman quarterback with 6 games under his belt, likely 6 starts. So that will set them up well for Indiana and then Penn State and Nebraska. Will those be night games? I guess that's up to Fox and how these these weeks get drafted by the TV networks and whether any of those will be the big noon kickoff. I was thinking, well, maybe Purdue will be one of those random night games that Ohio State gets stuck with because the games they'd like to have at night all have to be the big noon kickoffs. But Purdue being in the middle of November, I don't know if they'll want to go night game at that point or if Purdue would say, please no.
Of course, if the Buckeyes take care of business, they take care of business, and they don't care what happens elsewhere in the schedule. But if they lose a game, God forbid, lose 2 games, but it's a messy college football playoff scenario elsewhere, then I'm looking at the likes of Oregon needing to go back to the Pac-12 and take care of business, win the conference. Either a Penn State, Indiana, or Michigan, one of the 3 standing out as a contender in the East. Penn State's got a big game against Auburn non-conference. Michigan has Washington. Indiana's got a date against Cincinnati and need to go out of conference and look good for the Big Ten there. And then also Minnesota would be the one team out of the West that has the most chance of being a contender and looking good right there for the Buckeyes as a week 1 win. All right, got Tony Gerdeman on the line from
One
Buckeyes.
of the issues
Wagon from 247 Sports. Think we've got a bit of a lag there. You got something, Tone?
I was going to say one of the issues for Indiana and Penn State are their initial early season schedules because they've got tough openings where Indiana opens at Iowa, then they have Cincinnati in week 3 and at Penn State at week 5. I mean, they could conceivably be 2-3, and who knows what that does to their season. Penn State doesn't open much better because they open with, I think, at Wisconsin. I'm bringing up their schedule now. Yeah, at Wisconsin, then Auburn at home in week 3. And then they host Indiana in week 5 and go to Iowa. So, I mean, they could be a 3-3 team at that point. And I think we've seen Penn State bounce back really well last year after that terrible start. But what happens when these teams start out slowly? I was looking at Michigan's schedule about 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago, and they've got the Washington game. Then they also have, I believe, at Wisconsin in their first 6 games, first 5 games. Then they're at Nebraska the week after they're at Wisconsin. So, that's really, for me, the crux of their season, how they do in those 2 games. I would expect they lose to Wisconsin, but I don't think they can afford to lose at Nebraska because who knows what happens from that point. Is that where does the program just quit at that point? Does the team quit at that point, even though they'd be 4-2? I expect them to beat Washington, but just the first half of these seasons for all 3 of those teams, none of them are going to be easy.
Absolutely. And for anybody out there looking for some college football playoff madness from the group of 5, possibly making it difficult on the committee, root for Cincinnati. They have back-to-back games against Indiana and Notre Dame this year. Can you imagine if Cincinnati wins those 2 games?
Wow. That would give Fickell a leg up on replacing Brian Kelly as the Notre Dame head coach, perhaps. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I've said this before, though, and I've known Luke Fickell since 1992, 93 probably, and really rather wish they'd won that game than the way that they botched the ending of that game with Georgia. That was just very regrettable from a program trajectory and for his own personal trajectory. I think that and for a group of 5 trajectory, if they'd won that game, you would have said, man, Cincinnati really did deserve to have some playoff consideration. Instead, it's same old right now until they do break through and win that kind of a major game. So those are 2 wins, if they get them, that would put them on the map, no question about it, and would have them, if they're able to win the rest of their games, certainly in the top 6 or 7 all season long, if they're able to do it.
All right, let's get to the news of the week here. C.J. Barnett, who bridged the Jim Tressel, Urban Meyer era at defensive back, has been added as Director of Player Development. And we got questions coming in that we want to address. The Rod Farva asking in particular about Paul Rhoads, of course, Iowa State head coach at one point as a defensive analyst, Steve. So in addition to the job titles, has anything been communicated that would give us a little bit more insight into what we can expect out of those 2 gentlemen?
Well, CJ Barnett, he's going to have more of an off the field role, certainly. He replaces
Ryan Stamper.
Ryan Stamper. Thank you. I drew a blank on his name. And us outside the program always kind of labeled him as the quote fixer misdemeanor division, whereas Hiram DeVries, the former attorney for Exxon Oil, who was one of Urban Meyer's close confidants, was the fixer felony division. And I make light of the whole situation. Ryan Stamper was a great resource for the players, but CJ Barnett's experience with the Columbus Police will help, certainly as a liaison to law enforcement, if and when anything ever happens with any of the players from a legal situation. Knock on wood, those situations have been few and far between with Ohio State, and the players have been, on the whole, fairly well behaved. Obviously, there was the Amir Reap situation, and Jason Went last year. They're still awaiting trial on their sexual assault charges, I think, from about almost a year ago, felony charges. But, it's much more than what the player's getting in trouble off the field. He's a confidant, a resource, just somebody to pick the guys up when they're down, help them with whatever they need done off the field, housing, whatever kind of logistic help that they need. That guy is kind of a resource for the players, and very important. Stamper just had a huge impact, I think, on Ohio State program. A guy behind the scenes that wasn't talked about a whole lot, and he's gone down to Jacksonville to serve in kind of a similar tenure with Urban Meyer down there. He'll be kind of a concierge, type guy for the NFL players to, help them whatever they need off the field to get things figured out, so that they can perform on the field. That's the big part of the job for what Barnett's going to do and what Stamper did and what Stamper's going to do. I think Paul Rhoads brings experience to the staff. He's not going to be out there coaching on the field or have a position group or anything like that. He'll be studying. He'll be doing the kind of self-study that you need, and ask questions of the defensive staff and say, okay, this looks good. Why aren't we trying this? Or have you considered that? What about this player here? Those kind of things. Just another set of eyes and ears that's been there, that's coached in big games, and been an experienced part of a college football program to help them maximize the best. They've had analysts before, but you just don't get the sense that it's been anything on the level like Alabama had with Butch Jones and those other guys that he kind of ran through there as the retreads in recent years, to kind of be those eyes and ears type guys off the staff. So I'm interested to see how much input those guys get to make. And are these guys just coordinators in waiting or position coaches in waiting, waiting to take over a job when somebody like an Al Washington, let's say, gets plucked off to go somewhere else? Thankfully, that didn't happen for Ohio State this week. But to have more experienced guys in your building makes them available if and when something like that comes up.
Yeah, sometimes those guys in the building turn out to be Bill Davis, and sometimes they turn out to be Brian Hartline. You just never know. One of the other things that CJ Barnett is going to be doing, like Stamper did, was the Real Life Wednesdays, helping out with that, getting the job fair going, and life outside of football, that sort of thing as well. Because not everybody's going pro in football, as we know, as the saying goes. Some go pro in other things, but the analyst, the QC guys, I guess it would just be, what do they do? We'll just think about what a quality control person or a somebody that comes in from out of your job, what they do. A consultant does. It's your own work. For the listeners and the viewers out there, like, what do they do? Well, they look at numbers. They look at spreadsheets. They analyze. They are data analysts, and they know what they're looking for. And so then they're like, well, why is this like this? What about, as Steve said, what about this, doing this? It's no different. It's just a different, it's sports instead of accounting or whatever. And so that's what they'll be doing. I do get kind of a kick out of how much attention we give to it. And I think that's solely because of Alabama, because they hire so many fired coaches who have failed being head coaches, and then get this rebirth. And so it's like, well, if Alabama's doing it, everybody should, and maybe. But what you should do, like Alabama, is recruit like Alabama and have a head coach like Nick Saban. That's the most important thing about Alabama. And yes, having all of these analysts and things like that help to break down the work and frees up your assistant coaches. But Ohio State has had QC guys and analysts for a very long time, and it's just now we give it more attention because Ohio State fans look at it and are like, well, why don't we have Butch Jones? And it's like, well, do you really want Butch Jones? Is that what you really want Butch Jones, or is it just the fact that Alabama is bringing in head coaches and maybe you don't care who it is, just bring in head coaches? And so you get Paul Rhoads, who was a head coach 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years ago at Iowa State for a good handful of years. But it's good to have experienced eyes to look at all of this stuff and self-scout. I don't know whether that's the end-all, be-all of how successful your program is going to be, though.
Tony Gerdeman, Steve Hellwagon, typically Kevin Noon joins us as well, talking Ohio State football here each and every week. So typically it's on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern time. I had to shuffle some schedules. So here we are on a Thursday. Hope all of you enjoy and appreciate the knowledge, insight, and information that these guys provide. Vinay, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. We appreciate that. Question for the panel. Do you think we'll see Coach Day open up the playbook for whichever quarterback wins the job in week 1? Because against this Minnesota team, it just hit me that for a second consecutive year, the Gophers will be playing a high-profile opponent, starting a new quarterback, as they did against Joe Milton and gave up a ton of yardage and points in that one at home, this time against the Buckeyes.
Well, I don't know if Ohio State's going to have a Joe Milton level quarterback playing for them in 2021. Who could possibly say? But Ryan Day
stopped the comparisons there.
Ryan Day does always talk about being aggressive and wanting to be aggressive. I think he'll be aggressive until he sees that he can't be. And I think that would be the way he would lean, is to be aggressive. And then if that starts to backfire, then dial it back and give the ball to your running backs and take some easy passes. But when you've got Garrett Wilson and you've got Chris Olave and you've got Jeremy Ruckert and Jamison Williams and Julian Fleming, and let's go on and on and on, if you're not aggressive with those dudes, you're wasting them.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tony. I think that they're going to come out throwing the football. I mean, maybe not on the first play, but certainly early and often you got to test Minnesota's defense, and you got to get the two best players on the field, Wilson and Olave, the football. And I saw one thing, Pro Football, PFP, whoever that is, I think had those two guys listed as the top returning wide receivers, and Thayer Munford, the top returning offensive tackle in the country. So when you've got that kind of a tandem, and there were very few teams all season that could contend with the tandem. I mean, a lot of the teams they played had one very good corner, and he would rotate between the guys, but it was kind of hard to keep them under 100 yards. And so I think you're going to see a lot of 100-yard games for both those guys again this coming season, regardless of who the quarterback is. They may rotate quarterbacks. We don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. And I don't know that I'm necessarily a proponent of that, but just win football games is kind of my biggest thing, regardless if it's one quarterback or 1.5 quarterbacks or however you do it. But I think it's going to be, I mean, they're not going to put up the same numbers they have the last 3 years, I don't think, but it'll be approaching that. It'll be maybe a touchdown off of what it's been in recent years, but it's still going to be really good. I mean, I don't have any doubt about that. You have 3 offensive linemen back. You have an amazing tight end back. I mean, Ruckert could catch 10 touchdown passes this coming season. I think all 3 of those guys could catch 10 touchdown passes. And you do that, all of a sudden, now you're at 30 touchdown passes, and you haven't even thrown to anybody else. So, I think it's all within the realm of possibility. I just like to see a diversified attack to where, when you play a great defense in a big game, they can't take away the only thing you can hang your hat on, be it the running game, the intermediate passing game, whatever it might be. They can't take away your whole offense. And so that's what I want to see is an offense that grows throughout the season, gets better, improvement, and is playing its best football, obviously, toward the end of the season when the games become so much more meaningful and, the championship game, the playoffs, whatever, you're ready to go out and play a top contender. So that's, in my opinion, much more the what is much more important than the who. I was asked in my chat on Monday, who's going to play safety? And I put up there, probably Josh Proctor and then Malik Hooker and Lathan Ransom. And somebody immediately latched onto it and said, what did Hooker show to be that he'd be in this mix? And I'm like, well, you're talking about the 2020 Hooker. Maybe the 2021 Hooker is actually a good player, knows what he's doing, has had a full year of preparation, and is the best of the group. I mean, who are you to outlaw somebody just because they struggled in their first year, in a primetime position? It's all about how you have dealt with that and how much better you're going to be from this point until, when they play the games in September. So I think there's a lot of jobs on this team that are wide open. Even if guys have started half a season or maybe even a full year, I think there's positions on this team that can be taken very easily. I would only put in Penn, maybe Munford, Ruckert. I don't think you can put Harry Miller in Penn. Who am I missing on the offensive line? Oh, Petit Ferrer. Mm-hmm. I'd probably put him in Penn. And then, I don't think the running back situation is set. I don't think any of the other offensive line situations are set. So that's only three guys. And then over on the other side, I think Garrett would be in Penn. Tyreek Smith, I suppose, would be. Nobody at linebacker, maybe Banks, and that's it. So maybe 5 or 6 guys have a spot locked up going into 2021. You've got wholesale jobs wide open. And, a lot of the question was about quarterback and the offense. But, I think it's trial and error now for the next 8-9 months to figure out who are the best 11 guys and then to figure out the way to put them in the best position.
I think so many people acknowledge that, yes, we went through a pandemic and we're still going through it, and sure, it impacted the football team, but then they throw that out the window and then ask, why didn't this player play better, or why were things so bad? And it's like, well, they had no spring, they had no real summer, had no real fall camp. Is completely different fall camp, as Steve said, is going on during classes, whereas in the past there's no classes going on and it's literally just camp. Players sleep at a hotel, they sleep at the football facility on air mattresses, and they do all of these. It's completely unlike anything else. It is an NFL training camp, and you don't have that. And then season gets canceled, season gets restarted, games get canceled, games get, now you play this week, now you don't play next week. Just for listeners out there, like, how well are your kids learning this year in school, like going off and on, or learning at home, or, it's a wasted year for so many people. It's also going to be a wasted year for a lot of football players based on how they've had to go about doing what they do. And then, there's also not, maybe players are put in the wrong situation because that's what you had to do, because sometimes you lost somebody to COVID in terms of they're out for these 2 weeks. And so you never really got the full look at what Ohio State's defense would even be. And so you don't get a full look at the potential of the players. I would agree. Marcus Hooker was not great at times, and then was unavailable on defense for the last 3 games. So, but he played so much that you have to include him. Steve's chat, like you have to include him because that's a guy they know, and they know more about him than they do Lathan Ransom. They know more about him than they do Bryson Shaw or Court Williams or any of these guys. So the guys they know a lot about are probably the first guys to mention. And so, yeah, there's so many unknowns, and it's going to give us plenty to talk about until camp and through spring and all of that. But I do expect Ohio State to contend for a national title, but that's just assuming guys blossom and come through. I mean, replacing 3 linebackers and a 4th in Justin Hilliard, I mean, it doesn't just happen, but we're going to assume it will.
Yeah, for a team that's decidedly the Big Ten favorite by a wide margin, as Steve outlined, going unit to unit, a lot of uncertainty in regards to who the guys are going to be on the field that are going to make an impact play after play after play after play. I'm going to jump to the front of the line ahead of all the other questionnaires. And you guys may want to stew on this one and maybe give me an answer at the end of the show, or maybe even next week, because something Steve said led me to this one. This is like an all-time kind of question. Who's the most improved player that you've ever seen from the time you saw them step on the field for a game or two and thought, this guy's not much, to the end of their career? Who improved the most? So just sit on that for the rest of the show, and we'll move on to some of these other questions. Coming from Rod Farva, the talk about Steel Chambers moving over to linebacker, where does that come from? Is that speculation from just message boards, or is there a credible source in there, Tony?
Well, I don't think there's anything credible. However, DeJuan Jones, the offensive lineman, tweeted out of nowhere, I think yesterday, saying, man, just watching Steel Chambers highlights on defense, he could have played defense. And it's like, well, why are you watching Steel Chambers highlights on defense? Have you seen something in workouts? Is he now working with the linebackers? And is that why you're looking that way? But, I mean, he's a guy that I mentioned would probably end up at linebacker just because of the depth at running back. And there's also the fact that he had some fumbling issues this past year. And even though when he was in, he was good, but he did drop the ball, and I guess he had some issues in practice doing the same thing. But when you have so many running backs and you lose 4 linebackers, and you're going to lose 3 more after this year in Taraji Mitchell, Dallas Gant, and Kayvon Pope, who are all seniors heading into this year, I think he's needed more on defense. And he was a athlete, a linebacker, running back. Some guys liked him on defense, other teams liked him on offense. And so he has that capability. He's like 6'2", 220, can play linebacker for you. So I think there's just process of elimination. Then the DeJuan Jones spikes some things, spikes the speculation. But all in all, just because of you bring in Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor and the way Mayan Williams played last year, passing him by on the depth chart, you do the math on that one, and you think maybe he probably ends up on defense.
Yeah, I'm not of a mind that Steel Chambers is going to move. They've got some linebackers there. They've got the 3 guys who are juniors. Theoretically, they have 2 years of eligibility left. They were juniors this past year and juniors again this year, I guess. I don't know how we're going to account for all this, but at any rate, you've got those guys, Pope, Mitchell, and Gant, and then you have some young guys coming up behind them, like Eichenberg and Mitchell Melton and some other guys. Lyman, I think, is in that group that are kind of coming up behind them. And Reed Carrico obviously is enrolling this year. I think was he their only linebacker signee this year?
Yeah, but Jalen Johnson he's a safety, may end up being a Sam. But you've got Tommy Eichenberg, Craig Young as well as from
Craig Young,
2019 class.
Yeah, so they've got some bodies there. I don't think it's a desperation situation where you don't have people there at linebacker to play those positions. And I'm not sure beyond Mayan Williams and Master Teague what they really have at running back right now. So you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul if you do that. But they're bringing in 2 great running backs. Let's don't forget that. Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor are going to be outstanding, you think, at the college level. But, maybe that does kick somebody over to defense if that's the best thing for them. But, again, I think that's what spring football is all about, some experimentation and moving some guys around and getting a different look and maybe a little bit of teaching and just see, who can do what. Because, again, I don't think they're at a position in a lot of these position groups, where they can just assume, oh, we've got an all Big Ten guy there, don't worry about it. It's not like that. I think they got to develop that kind of caliber player going forward.
Well, and Marcus Crowley also played in that Alabama game. So if you look at it by who's playing, you've got Steel Chambers, who enters spring the number 4 guy, and I don't think anybody expects Travion Henderson to be the number 5 guy. And he's going to get on the field somehow and command certainly more carries than Steel Chambers has, maybe more carries than Marcus Crowley has to this point. And so, it just becomes a thing where they're being in the 2 deep at linebacker is closer to the field than being number 5 or number 6 running back. And it's a way to maybe, at this point, you ask the kid, what would you like to do? And that, and if you want him to stick around, you try to do what he wants. If you don't want him to stick around, you put him on the other side of the ball.
We've talked Ohio State football here with Tony, Steve, and typically Kevin for 92 consecutive weeks. I'm guessing these guys have missed maybe 1 or 2. Maybe. We're working on 2 years now with these guys, and they donate at least an hour. And by the time we have to message back and forth and figure things out, and they've got to prepare to jump on here, we ask for more than an hour out of them each and every week. So I hope that everybody out there realizes what we've got with Steve and Tony, and typically with Kevin as well. All right. So if Steel Chambers does move over to linebacker, he's going to be coached by Al Washington still. Some Tennessee fans wanted him there. And do we think that it was simply a decision, and maybe I'm asking a lot of speculation here as to whether Washington just measured the 2 jobs and liked where he was, or whether the pot was sweetened, whether that meant financially or in regards to added responsibilities?
Steve?
Is that possible?
Yeah, I think when it all comes out in the wash, we're going to find out he got a major raise and probably promoted to co-defensive coordinator. I don't think today is the day when we're going to find that out, perhaps. But I think eventually that's going to come out in the wash, and I think that that's probably the right thing for Ohio State to do at this point. He seems like an integral person with this defense. The linebacker group is in great flux right now, and you need stability there. They are recruiting some outstanding players at that position. We know that Al Washington, while a lot of the speculation was going on, participated in a recruiting call with Gabe Powers from Marysville, who's going to be a senior this upcoming year, and told him he was planning to be at Ohio State. So that was a good sign, I think, that, you're going to have that stability. And you could say what you want about Tennessee, and my overall thought is that program has really kind of been in a 20-year downward spiral, and just kind of a tough place to be, I think, for the last 20 years. And when you have to play Georgia, Florida, and Alabama every year, man, that's really tough. And in recent years, it's been 3 automatic losses pretty much religiously. I would bet out of those in the last 15 years, 45 games, I would say that they've probably won less than 10 or 15 of those 45 games in the last 15 years against those 3 schools. So
it's the last 11 years.
What's that? 3 in the last
30 is the last 11 years.
3-30 in the last 11. Yeah. So that'll give you an idea of the uphill battle that you have. I like our Tennessee publisher. He seems like a nice guy, but he got up there on Twitter and was like, it's a top 10 wins program all time, and it's this and it's that. You can win at Tennessee and whatever. And I didn't mean it with any kind of malice at all. I said, buddy, I look at your recruiting rankings, and you're 25, 20, 15, 17, 20, last 5 years, average ranking 20. You're not going to beat Alabama with average ranking 20 class, when they're average ranking 1.5. You're just not going to beat them. And Georgia and Florida are average ranking 4 or 5 over the last 10, 15 years. you're not going to beat them until you get your average recruiting ranking to 7 or 8. When you get it to 7 or 8, come see me. And then maybe you'll play them within 2 touchdowns. But you losing to them by 30 every time out was preordained on December the 18th when you signed your class. And it has been every year. And so that works against Tennessee trying to get Al Washington to go there because they're not on third base. They're going down the first base. In fact, they are just leaving the batter's box. Okay. They just hit a chopper, and it seems promising if they can leg it out. That's where Tennessee is right now.
It's 1988 Kirk Gibson.
Yes. You can go to Tennessee, and I assume Heupel got, because of the probation, I don't know what his contract is. I assume it's something outrageous. 5, 6, 7 years for $5, $6, $7 million a year guaranteed money. It would have to be to get him to take that job. I would hope whoever that they hire as their offensive and defensive coordinator will get a similar 5-year, no cut, $1.2 to $1.5 million a year contract, guaranteed money, because who in the hell would go there if it wasn't? So, that's kind of where they're at right now. And again, I have no malice against Tennessee. College football was good when they were good, and college football hasn't really missed them. I mean, they haven't been on the national level in 15 or 20 years, and I think we've done just fine without them. So, good luck. Good luck to you.
Tennessee, like the last 20 years, is Michigan State without all of the success. And when it comes to you're behind the 8 ball in your division immediately, they're very similar. So I'm trying to imagine, like, would Al Washington go to Michigan State to be the defensive coordinator? And if he turned down a bunch of money, would it surprise me? No. Both programs are rebuilding, but there's so many issues at Tennessee, cultural, NCAA, not the least of which, that when, yes, you think about it because of the money, like, this is a lot to turn down and say no to, say 3 years, $4.5 million contract, something like that. But then as you think about it, it's like, well, the reason they're offering is because they know they need, they're desperate. Not that they're desperate, but they know they have to throw a lot of money to get somebody they want, because it's not an enticing job. So they have to entice you with the money. Other places can entice you with the opportunity and the recruiting, and that's not Tennessee right now. Maybe it'll be Tennessee in 6 years, but that's not who they are right now. And for Al Washington, he knows his job is secure at Ohio State, and it is as long as he wants it. I mean, just look at Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell would still be the linebackers coach at Ohio State if he wanted to be. And so there is a place to grow and build, and then eventually go somewhere else and do something. But so it was just, if you go to Tennessee, it's, yes, the paycheck is nice. The recruiting, who knows what you can even do, how many you can bring in. You can't bring, who knows what kind of scholarship restrictions. And then what's the talent? Your best linebackers have left through the portal. What are you coming into as a defensive coordinator? There's a lot of reasons to go in terms of money. There are more reasons, I think, to stay, because a better job will come along next year. And I think that's the key for any kind of Ohio State assistant looking to move on. If it's Tennessee this year, maybe it's Georgia next year. And so if you want to go be a coordinator, and maybe it's Ohio State next year, somebody better than Tennessee will come along next year if Al Washington does a job well this year.
Expanding out to the Big Ten once again, Ryan D is asking, as we review the schedule, the most difficult stretch in the schedule, and Joel is asking for the biggest surprise possibility in the Big Ten in 2021. So for me, I think right out of the gate, Minnesota, Oregon, Tulsa is a pretty good stretch for the Buckeyes to have to deal with. Certainly 2 teams that they are substantially better than, and one that they're decidedly better than in Oregon. So it's not like a gauntlet. But most likely a little bit tougher than that is a trip to Indiana, Penn State, and then if Nebraska comes through and plays better football, as we would all expect at some point based on the recruiting rankings, Indiana, Penn State, and Nebraska, with 2 of those on the road.
Yeah,
that's where I am. The second one.
Yeah, it kind of looms pretty large. And then you come out of that, I think they play Purdue which Purdue is always kind of a physical team and, kind of that gum on the bottom of your shoe type team that's kind of hard to put away sometimes. I mean, they're not elite, but they don't typically lay down either. They fight you all the way to the end. And so that could be a sticky game on the end of that 3-game stretch as well. But, I agree with you. If Indiana and Nebraska are all they're cracked up to be, and if Penn State, obviously had figured some things out the second half of the season that they didn't have figured out in the first half of the season, if they carry that over and continue that win streak, and maybe haven't lost a game when they come to Ohio State, and if now won set, or it would be by that point 10 or 11 in a row, dating to this past season, then they've got a lot going for them coming to Columbus. So I don't know what their schedule stacks up like prior to that, or even if they're playing anybody outside the conference that's going to beat them. But at any rate, yeah, I look at those two stretches. The second one you mentioned is probably the more difficult.
And if that game was outs, then maybe I'd go with the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope that they find a way to reschedule that later in the decade for a return game. I hope I'm still doing this by the time that they do it, because I'd like to go out there and see what all the fuss is about at Oregon. I guess the day that we were supposed to be there this year, they were having the wildfires out there, and there was smoke and fog everywhere. It was open to debate whether or not they would have been able to have the game or not, I think, that day that the game was supposed to be played.
So we get the typical pecking order in the Big Ten, although Indiana's kind of crashed the party to a certain extent. So, Tony, if you're looking at a surprise team, and of course we want to see spring football and really get a feel for it and make a better selection later, but as it stands right now, who do you think could jump out?
The thing is, like, Indiana is no longer a surprise because of what they did last year. And I think they have overtaken Michigan State as a top 4 in the East. So I think you have to look out west. And is there a surprise there? I see all of those teams as even, pretty much. So my surprise team just popped in my head right now, Michigan, where people are kicking them now when they're down. I looked at their schedule earlier today, and I think I came up with 8-4. Could that be 9-3, 10-2? I don't think so, but maybe. I mean, if we're talking teams that are capable of something, they have more talent than most. The expectations are down. Nobody is expecting anything from Jim Harbaugh. He's got a new coaching staff. There's new energy there. We have no idea if the bulk of this coaching staff can call plays correctly or develop players. But hey, if they get Ohio State at home, so there is that. The back half of their schedule, they could lose, probably 4 of those 6. But if they're 6-0, then they believe in themselves, and there's this power, if you're a Michigan man, of just self-belief. And as you're seeing things happen, you believe yourself even more. Whether it's all a lie or not, it doesn't matter. You just start to believe that you are this perfect entity. And then of course Don Brown calls a blitz, and then things fall flat. But Don Brown is gone now, so maybe things settle down. I think maybe Rutgers also, but not surprise worthy enough. Can they beat an Indiana or a Michigan or a Penn State at home? Like, maybe, but I'll go Michigan, because I just think the West cannibalizes itself, and I don't know if anybody stands out there right now.
And before you go, Steve, Steve Dace, our Michigan podcast guy, was on. I was on his show yesterday. He was on over here, and he thinks it's going to go either or for the Wolverines. Either they catch that stride you're talking about, Tony. It all comes together. They start the 5-star freshman, and they get some mojo working, and they have a season like they had a couple of years ago before it all came crashing down in Columbus, or it falls apart from the start, because I had set up a kind of A to Z process that any college football player and program goes through from the time you recruit the player all the way to the result on the field. And I had a culture column in there, that you run those players through that process of culture, structure, what you deliver to them that builds them as young men. And Steve, they said, we don't have that at Michigan. That's a 0. That's an F. That's a failing right there. We recruit really good players, and we can coach them to a certain extent. But Jim Harbaugh is basically the brand. He's the personality, but it's not a culture. He's just a guy. And that's where we fail. So he thinks it's either going to take off or they're going 4-8.
But even think back
to
to
that.
this is just a microcosm, real quick. When Michigan players were on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football, so many of them would say, "I'm this person from this high school," and they don't. Somebody would not say they're from Michigan, and that's a culture thing from way back when. And so I don't think it's just a Jim Harbaugh thing. I also think it's a Lloyd Carr thing, and certainly a Rich Rod thing. So sorry, Steve, but that's just one thing I want to throw in there. It's like there's been a culture issue for a while there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to me. By default, the people who do the preseason polls and the magazines always have Michigan. It used to be they were always 5, 6, 7, 8, and then they couldn't justify that anymore because they never finished in the top 20. And so then they dropped them here in the last 3 or 4 years. They've been anywhere from 12 to 16, very rarely outside the top 15. And they can't justify that this year. This is going to be their lowest preseason ranking in any magazine or AP or coaches poll in 40 years, probably this coming year, coming off the season that they had 2-4 or whatever it was. And it's going to be interesting to read the write-ups and see what people really think about Michigan. And has everyone finally, for the last time, jumped off that bandwagon and realized there's nothing special there. There's nothing, and there hasn't been for years. There's just nothing. If you change the name of that program to Wake Forest, people wouldn't bat an eyelash at whatever record they came back with. But because it's Michigan, they have to be in the top 10 to start the season. And they have to go 8-4 every year and lose to their rival by multiple touchdowns. And then they're right back up there in the top 12 to 15 in the preseason the following year. And they lead the world in where they started to where they ended, always being a minus in the last 20 years.
Well, Steve, I got to say, since Harbaugh took over in 2015, up until last year, they were 9-3, 10-2 all those seasons.
Yeah, but even the losses, you came away, they get smoked. I mean, it was
they did. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean,
there's
you're right. You're right. The 1 versus or 2 versus 3 game was a special thing. But there's just, I don't know. There's just they had little dollops here and there, I guess, but it's just nothing that I don't know. You could put them in the same category as Florida State and, Tennessee and all these other programs that were great in the 80s and 90s, but just don't have anything going for them right now. And they are starting at rock bottom again, trying to put one brick on top of another brick on top of another brick. And it's hard to play catch up in college football. It takes a while, and there's no quick fix, although this one-time transfer thing, you could bring in 4 offensive starters and 3 defensive starters from other schools in one offseason and change your fortune like that if you get the right guys. But I don't know. I guess we'll see how that all plays out. But for a surprise team, to get back to that, if I had to pick one, man, damn, that is just tough. I want to go with somebody in the West. I don't think Iowa's a real big surprise. They're always in that 8-9 wins. Purdue, Illinois, Northwestern won the division second time in 3 years, but I think it'd be a big surprise if they won it again without Peyton Ramsey. I don't know. Mark me down, as I have no idea who would be a surprise team in the Big Ten, because there'll be one, but Lord, hell if I know who it'll be.
Don't hold me to it, but if we're just talking about elevating from what has been garbage for about 10 years to, let's say, 7-5, I'm going to say Maryland, because I think they've recruited really well. They've got talent on the roster, and this past recruiting class, which probably won't have much of an impact, is heavy on the defensive side. And I'll say for a team that wins 8 or 9 games typically, can they make that 2015 push to a Big Ten championship? Would be for me Iowa. I think they could possibly be a serious contender this year.
Yeah, I need to study depth charts and see who really has everybody back, and talk to our 24/7 publishers before spring practice begins. A lot of these places, and get a firm idea of what we're looking at. I think our company did have a Big Ten roundup of sorts this past week, and it was interesting. What some of their thoughts were. I think they banking on Penn State coming back pretty good, and Rutgers maybe showing a few things as you guys talked about. But the West, as we said, I mean, nothing would surprise me. I think Wisconsin will have a winning record. But the ones at the bottom could go from 2 and whatever to 5 and 2. I mean, or I don't know. I guess I don't have my numbers right, but 5 and 4, I guess. Wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Some of it's the draw you get with the crossover teams. If you don't have to play Ohio State or whoever, Indiana, that really catches fire from the East, if you don't have to play them, then so much the better. But I think Indiana is going to have another really good season. I mean, with Penix back and Freifogel, I mean, it's kind of like Ohio State. You just mark them down for 35 or 40 points every game, and then was it enough to win the game? That's the question you're left with.
I think the West is turning into a really good division, and I think with Bielema and Illinois, they could possibly become decent. I'm not predicting anything lofty for Illinois, but could become decent under his. And then Nebraska is the wild card, but not an elite. Like there's not going to be an elite over there, but man, they could just fill up the top 25 with like 5 teams. We could see that over the next several seasons.
I agree. They're recruiting well enough, and they've got stability with the coaching staffs too, which I think Bielema is going to be at Illinois for a long time, and I think Frost is probably going to be at Nebraska a long time. Brom's probably going to be at Purdue a long time. I mean, I just don't get a sense where there's the one that kind of you wonder about is Fleck. If he's able to have another big year at Minnesota, does he jump off to a Georgia level type program that is in the national contention potentially? But I'm not saying he's going to Georgia. I'm just saying that was what kind of popped into my head. Somebody that is a top 10 program that is looking for a coach for whatever reason. Could he be that next elite guy that emerges? But
USC.
USC, that there's an example. But I don't know. I'm bullish on the Big Ten. I think Urban Meyer, what he did to raise the Big Ten can never be stated enough. I mean, it was in the bowels of lethargy, certainly, and he made everybody care again and try. So that's because you see that if you do well, there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, like Ohio State winning the championship and now been to the playoffs 3 times since they've won the championship. So Michigan State's been to the playoff. I mean, you can get there from here if you have a great year.
There's your raffle ticket question. Who's going to be the next Big Ten team to make the playoff other than Ohio State? Penn State would seem to be the
Penn State. Yeah, Penn State has all the advantages going for them with a fertile recruiting ground in Pennsylvania and the East Coast. If Franklin were to stay there and find whatever is missing to take that one last step to where they're Ohio State's quasi equal and can beat them twice every 5 years or something, it's a big step. But I don't know. That's the one thing that he can't. That's the one stumbling block he's got. It's kind of like he's Auburn and Ohio State's Alabama. It's just you're always knocking on the door, but very rare that you get to go through that door. So
I'll go Wisconsin 12-0 or 12-1 losing to Ohio State in a Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, they
When
would have been in.
Grant Mertz is like a senior or something like that, playing against Ohio State as the best team in the nation.
2017 came within 6 points. NH, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution, leaving us with that as we sign off here. Keep up the good work, men. Ohio transplant who loves OSU. All right, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. Please join him and the rest of the staff over there. Tony, you got a podcast as well, right?
Yeah, Buckeye Weekly. You can find it on all of your platforms. Recording it, we drop 2 a week, so it's an odd name, but it's a frequent show.
I brainstormed for hours to come up with Ohio State Buckeyes Live, but I understand not everybody can be that creative. Steve.
Good. It's catchy.
Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247. Anything else you got going, Steve, we need to look out for?
No, just trying to survive this winter. I turned 53 on Saturday, so I got that going on.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. Hey, answering your question, I saw some people put out there some different names. One of them that comes to mind is Donnie Nicky. He was a safety, played 4 years for Ohio State, and he got stuck in there as a redshirt freshman in '99 when they were 6-6, and the whole defense was terrible. But when he was a senior, he was a captain on the national championship team. So he's a guy that went from the outhouse to the penthouse in 4 years, and certainly improved. But again, stuck out there by default as a redshirt freshman. If I had to think of some other guys in that ilk. There were a couple others that kind of came to mind, guys who maybe had some rough Eddie George was a name, obviously the fumbles as a freshman, Heisman Trophy winner as a senior. But I think everybody who saw Eddie as a freshman realized he was going to be something special. It just took him a day or two to get from point A to point B. I don't know. Tony, did you have anybody to answer his question from earlier about
Haskell Garrett? Back
up
for 3 years,
did nothing for the first 2 years, and then
shot. Before the season becomes an All-American. So went from 3 years as a backup to an All-American, which is pretty incredible.
He was a throw-in in the Tate Martell acquisition, and then turns out to be the better part of that deal. So
probably a better quarterback too.
Probably a better quarterback. Oh my God. Urban carried on about Tate because of how hard he worked out, called him an elite warrior and all this stuff. It threw the kid a bone. Here's Haskins throwing for 8,000 yards, gets him down inside the 5-yard line, but could not put the ball in the end zone to save his life. And inside the 10-yard line, and they put the poor kid in the game. And I think it was Indiana or somebody. And they had a false start as Isaiah Prince jumped off sides, which he was prone to do. But you change that cadence, down on the goal line, goofy things happen. And what was it? It was 3 things happened. A false start, fumbled the snap. He fumbled the snap, or it was a wide snap. And then one other thing happened. And, of course, the kid had to kick a field goal. But, Meyer loved that kid like he was Nate Meyer. I mean, he just he just loved that kid. Maybe his name was Tate Meyer. I don't know, but it was a love affair. And now, where's he going now? Has he found a home yet?
I don't believe so.
He should go back to Vegas. They're playing their games in the NFL stadium now, aren't they?
He should go back to Vegas. He might end up on TikTok, though. I don't know.
So Tate Martell would be the inverse of the question that I asked. The 5-star that so much.
There's a lot of those now. There's a lot of 5-star quote unquote busts that have come through Ohio State. A lot of linebackers.
My quick answer to my own question would be the obvious would be Troy Smith. Not that he improved on the field. From the time he stepped on the field, his second game was the big Michigan game. So it wasn't necessarily what he showed on the field, but he was recruited and signed as an athlete, correct? And so there wasn't a whole lot expected of him to be a starting quarterback at Ohio State. And then he turns out to be the best player in the nation.
Yeah, signed in the same class as Justin Zwick, who was one of the most prolific passers in Ohio high school history when he came out of Massillon. And everyone just anointed Zwick because he was right out of central casting, 6'4", 215, 220, whatever, seemed to have all the stuff going for him. But, And again, he was put on a team there in 2004 that just didn't have anything going for it. Young offensive line, young running backs, and young receivers, and not very good, not very good, just across the board. So, yeah, it was a tough go there for those guys.
All right. These guys are amazing. We appreciate it. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, have a great rest of your week and weekend. And we'll see you back here next Wednesday or whenever, because we've got schedules that have to be worked out, folks. So that's why you subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications. Guys, have a great week.
All right, Mark.